time for the Alien Conspiracy Podcast. We are your hosts, Agent Ether
and Agent Anderson. Come along as we examine UFO sightings, conspiracies, and all things strange. You can follow the show on Twitter at AlienConPod. We also have an email address, alienconpod@protonmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Discord. Links in the description. This week's episode, From the Files of Project Bluebook, Part 4. This week's episode, From the Files of Project Bluebook, Part 4.
I was going to say, this is like the fourth one we've done.
Yeah, I really like these because there are so many good cases hidden in the files of Project Bluebook. And pretty much everything I look at for this type of episode, if you look at the summary card, it says that it's been solved. But then when you read the case, you're like, that doesn't sound like a weather balloon, you know?
Weren't we going to give the listeners a little background this time around?
Well, first, before we do that, I'm going to give a shout out to our live audience.
Hi, live audience.
Before, like at the beginning of the episode, because by the end, we're on the west coast of the United States, and we've got people listening from all over the place. So it's not unusual by the end for people to have checked out because, you know, they have to go to sleep or they're busy or whatever. And, you know, it is Friday night, so often people have plans anyways. So let's give a shout out to our live audience. We got Pimp Simpins, Sky Knight 11, Zenith?
Probably Zenith.
Yeah, Zenith. The Chad, Miggles Wick, Donut Slayer, Gray Scaling, Higher Theory, ... What is this? Higher Theory. I think I know. I just want to make sure I get it right. And Tyrannosquatch, but wait, how do I get the full name? How do I get the full name here?
We have quite an audience this evening.
Higher Theories Podcast. I'm guessing that's a podcast. I'll have to check it out. Oh, yeah, I think I already checked it out. I'll have to check it out again. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate you being in the live audience. And this is on Discord, so anybody who wants to listen to us live and suffer through our
cryptids,
our mistakes and everything that I have to edit out, then come join us on Discord for the live show. This time we're doing it on Friday, but actually because Agent ETA has switched schedules at work, we're going to start doing it on Tuesday evenings at some time. We haven't decided exactly when, but we're going to move the live show to Tuesday.
Agent Kruger also has more availability on Tuesday, so it's going to work out.
Yeah, it'll be better all around. So apologies for anybody if that's an inconvenience, but hopefully it's convenient for more people than it's not.
Or better, because it's a Tuesday.
Yeah. So hopefully that works out. All right. This week, we're talking about Project Bluebook. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Project Bluebook, I mean, who is? I mean, everybody should know about Project Bluebook. This was the Air Force's investigative efforts to look into UFOs. Specifically, it was the public-facing office that would look at reports and make public statements and determinations for UFO sightings. Because there were quite a few that were, national headlines or, national sightings, or there was a region. Think of like the Phoenix Lights, where an entire city, like a big city, saw something and then people wanted answers. That was what Project Bluebook was supposed to be for, was investigating UFO cases. But after an early period of actually trying to do that, it ended up being more of a way of sort of debunking stuff, and they didn't really investigate stuff after a certain point. Probably the golden age would be when Ruppelt was in charge of it, but after he left, it kind of went downhill from there, but there's a lot more to it. Maybe we should do a whole episode just on Project Bluebook sometime, because there's a lot of really interesting topics we can go into. But for now, let's go into some of the files of Project Bluebook.
Sounds good to me.
You want to go first, Agent Ether?
Well, why don't I do my short one, and then you can do a couple short ones.
All right.
So we'll pass it back and forth. So I was thinking to myself today, what kinds of people that I would take most seriously if they were to come to me and tell me they'd witnessed a UFO, witnessed something unusual. And of course, there's pilots, former military, that sort of thing. And then I thought, doctors. I work in the medical field. If one of the doctors I work with came to me and said they'd seen a UFO, I'd figure they were either pulling my leg or telling the truth.
Well, it's got to be one or the other, right?
Got to be one or the other.
So what part, you work in the medical field doing experiments or research on captured alien corpses. Is this correct?
Yes, that is correct. We bombard them with radiation to see if our radiation suits, when we take them into space, are actually working.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Kind of use them like mice, you know?
Let's hear your file.
Okay, it's a short one. So we have Dr. Wagner from Menominee Falls, which is named after a Native American tribe and is now like the headquarters for Kohl's, how far it's come. And this was in Wisconsin on November 14th, 1964. He wrote directly to Captain Hector Quintanilla at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. He said because he saw that name in his local paper. So that's who he reached out to. He was stargazing with two 10-year-olds, girls, and a friend who is also a doctor named Rudy Marin, when all three of them, and it doesn't say his friend, it just says him and the girls, saw three reddish-hued objects in the north-south axis near the constellation of Hydra. They would travel rapidly past the North Star. They were evenly spaced about 3 to 5 degrees, and the two girls noticed right away, and they said, "Look at that." And just as they said that, the two objects closest to Polaris merged, then came apart in a parallel path closer together than before. Then the three objects disappeared behind a constellation, and here I could not read which constellation it was, as is often the case. Some of the file was not legible. The estimated time of travel was 5 to 6 seconds from the east to the west. So the three objects were estimated to have a magnitude of 2 to 3, which I think means in comparison to other stars. I can't remember which star is magnitude 1 or magnitude 10, but that would be on a scale.
Yeah.
And it may have had a faint trail or luminosity following the object, but the good doctor stated it was not anything like the tail of a meteor.
Okay.
It was quickly moving, and the way that it was grouped and the way it was traveling, he said, "I hope others saw this interesting sight. Most unusual." The data was sent to Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a consultant for the Air Force project, and the doctor was informed that the investigation was inconclusive. They said it was similar to the observation of birds, but there was no evident light source strong enough to reflect off of the birds, and the case was left as unidentified.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of a weird one, but so that's pretty much all there is to it, though.
Yeah, so I looked around for around the same date, around the same area. I didn't see any other sightings. It sounds like it was quite brief. But it also sounds like it wasn't a meteor from what he described. It was something, but we don't know what. I did find a couple other, not files, but references online to that area. There was a sighting in August of 2017. Someone was out in their driveway and they noticed a very bright white light, and it was moving too slow to be a meteor. They thought it was a plane, but there were no flashing lights. It was too bright. It had no wing lights. Its speed suddenly increased and came at us extremely fast. Then it stopped in midair and then disappeared.
Huh.
So that was interesting. And then in, I have October 2012, there were 3 orange moving lights in the shape of a triangle. This person was walking home from the library. It was about twilight, on its way to full dark, but not quite, when they saw 3 copper orange shapes in the shape of a triangle with 2 on top and 1 on the bottom. Now, this person was cutting through a park, and there was a woman walking her dog, but she didn't seem to notice, and he didn't point it out to her. They weren't super bright, but their color and placement and formation made them hard to miss. They did flicker like stars, but as he watched, the two lights that made up the bottom of the triangle very slowly rotated, changing the distance between the two lights slightly while the top light remained stationary, and then the lights winked out one by one like a candle would be guttering out, and there was nothing but sky. So that's it for my first little case.
That doesn't sound normal.
No, none of those sound normal, but they all sound believable.
Yeah.
As a sighting, nothing extraordinary, but definitely something unusual that you can't explain.
Yeah, they just saw something weird and they reported it, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right. Well, I will get into my first case here, which is, I thought, a really fun one. So if you've listened to this show before, you know that we've talked about Kenneth Arnold. And this was a famous sighting on June 24th, 1947, that basically kicked off the modern wave of UFOs. This is the event. Kenneth Arnold is the event that has like the dividing line between, older UFO stuff and newer UFO stuff. That's generally when people will, divide it. So this is a sighting that happened 10 days before Kenneth Arnold's sighting on June 14th, 1947. And this happened in Bakersfield, California. So on the files, there's a cover card, and I'll say which page I'm getting stuff from in case you guys want to go and look it up yourself. You can go ahead and look this up. You can go to Fold 3. You can look up the June 14th, 1947 Bakersfield, California sighting, and you can read everything in the file that I've seen myself. So the cover card says that the conclusion is other birds. So, birds. Well, I mean, skip this one, right? If it's just birds, it's probably not that interesting.
Mine was also birds, but not birds.
Yeah, exactly. So the brief summary on the front card is, observer first sighted 10 objects to the east with one straggler. Later saw 7 objects flying in a V. It was a civilian witness, and there were 17 total objects. On the second page, you see it has the incident number. Some of these have incident numbers, even though, unfortunately, most of them do not when you're looking at Fold 3. So if you go to Fold 3 and try to find incident number 38 or whatever, you probably won't be able to. You'll have to look up the location and the date instead. But anyways, on page 2, it says it's incident number 29, 14th of June, 1947, 1200 hours, noon, and 14:15, so that's 2:15 in the afternoon in Bakersfield, California. The observer, an experienced pilot, reported sighting 10 and later 7 objects at 8,500 feet altitude, traveling 350 miles an hour in a loose V formation.
Definitely sounds like birds.
Yeah, it does actually at first glance.
350 miles per hour.
There's all kinds of birds that can fly that fast. They're just using the wrong technology in our airplanes, right? Although the objects were apparently at a considerable distance, the reporter described them as being similar to the XF-5U-1 Flying Flapjack. And the Flying Flapjack is sort of like it's like a flat airplane with 2 propellers. And it does kind of look like a flying saucer. So some people have said that this is what's responsible for many of the flying saucer reports of the time. But the problem with that is that only 2 flying flapjacks were ever built, and only one was actually fully built and actually flown and tested. The other one was never completed. So basically only 1 flapjack was ever built and flown. So obviously that's not what we're looking at here if we're talking about a total of, 10 objects or 17 objects total, I mean. So that's what he said it looked like, was the flying flapjack. You can look that up, Google it. There's a Wikipedia article with a picture, and it's a pretty unique looking airplane, but when you see a full-size picture of it, it does not look like a flying saucer, not really. Anyways, he stated that that he attached no particular importance to the sighting until he read of the Cascade Mountain sighting, incident number 17. He then recalled this incident, and I'm guessing incident 17 has to be Kenneth Arnold's incident because he saw that in the news and then he decided to report his sighting. And then on page 2, after that, it says, opinion. There is no information contained in this report to refute the assumption that these objects were ordinary aircraft beyond the range of identification. The fact that no one else in Bakersfield reported observing anything unusual tends to substantiate this conclusion. Now, this is something I've seen many times in the files, is that, well, nobody else reported it, so it must be fake. And I think that's kind of silly because if you look at like local newspapers and stuff like that, you'll see that other people did witness this stuff. They just didn't tell the Air Force about it. And also there are many cases where there are multiple witnesses, but for some reason or other, sometimes very obvious reasons, like people are afraid to report something because they don't want to be seen as crazy. They don't want to have it come back and bite them in the ass and they lose their job or whatever. A lot of the times people just don't report stuff. So I think that's sort of like, I don't know what kind of logical fallacy it would be, but I think that's a strange thing to say is like, well, nobody else reported it, so it must be fake. You know, I think that's kind of a mistake on their part. Maybe they were doing that to try to, you know, rush the investigation or to not have to really take it seriously. But this page was probably written by Alan Hynek, I believe, but it was not signed by him. But that's what it appears maybe he wrote it. I'm not sure. So on page 3, the next page, it says Incident 29, Portland, Oregon is crossed out, and that's replaced with Bakersfield, California. And we'll get into why that was originally reported as Oregon first. And then, so Bakersfield, California, 14th of June, 1947. There's nothing whatever in this incident to suggest that the objects observed were of astronomical origin. Their maneuvers and the relatively long time they were in sight definitely preclude any possible astronomical interpretation. It is of interest to note that in this locality and at this season, other possibly similar non-astronomical incidents were reported. For example, number 17 and number 68. So that page was definitely written by Alan Hynek. 100% was written by him. And he's talking about astronomical stuff there. And he's saying, well, it kind of contradicts the previous page saying that, you know, maybe it is something because there was very similar things that happened around the same time. Page 4 is titled Dr. Hynek's Evaluations Extracted from Project Grudge Report. And the list of case numbers the page is basically a list of case numbers organized by different headings. And this one under heading number 3, non-astronomical with no explanation evident, subgroup B, evidence offered suggests no explanation. In other words, Hynek is basically saying that it's unexplained, whereas the cover card says that it's birds. But other than the cover card, I didn't see anywhere in the file does it say anything about birds. It never talks about birds except on the front page. It's kind of weird, right?
Does the front page have a public face or is it all classified?
I believe that would have all been classified at the time.
That is very strange then.
But there might have been pressure from higher up to come to some sort of conclusion on these things. You know, they don't want it to be unexplained. They want you to be able to come up with an explanation for what these people are seeing. And that's what your job is. So they probably felt like they had to come up with explanations for as many of them as possible. And anybody who wants to know a little bit behind the scenes, I did read all 20 chapters of Ruppelt's book about his time working in Project Bluebook. So that's a really good read. Maybe not that entertaining for some people, but I thought it was an excellent book. And I don't necessarily take it at face value, but it's still a fun book. Anyways, on page 5, there appears to be a page from the Grudge report, and it's a little hard to read, but it has some stuff on there about, evaluating cases and whatever. But on the bottom, there's an excerpt from the bottom that says, in the following section of this report, each remaining unexplained incident is considered separately. It is not the intent to generally discredit the character of observers, but each case has undesirable elements, and these cannot be disregarded. The numerical designation is merely the categorical order of the incident in the project files. And then 29, this case is circled from a list of case numbers. So I'm guessing that excerpt applies to this case. And just as a side, if you haven't heard me talking about Project Bluebook before, they say that it is not the intent to discredit observers or witnesses, but they did that all the time. They constantly attacked witnesses.
Like their characters, their abilities,
right,
their sanity.
Like if you go back to the first episode I ever did about the Michigan swamp gas, Alan Hynek specifically said that he went around investigating the witnesses rather than the event. So you have this astronomer running around interviewing people, asking if this is a reliable witness, which I suppose that's not a horrible thing to do. But on the other hand, he always found something negative to say about the witnesses, So it's like they're looking for ways to discredit the witnesses, despite them saying that they're not. All right, so on page 6, we have a summary that is just, sort of like a bunch of different data points. So the name is redacted. The occupation is a pilot. It was observed from a front yard. The direction of flight, the first group was south to north. The second group was north to south. It was flying in a V formation with one object straggling in the rear. The sound was not stated. The size, it resembled the XF5U-1 flying flapjack. The apparent construction, flying machines. Weather conditions, clear and sunny. And I skipped a lot of them that were either not filled out or repeating stuff or whatever. On page 7 and 8, you have the actual witness statement. And this is where the fun is. This is where all the good stuff is. So here's the witness statement. Let's see. Also, page 8 is an expanded statement. I'm not sure why there are two. 7 is like a summary, and then page 8 and page 9 is like the full statement. And it looks like that was from an interview that happened in Portland, Oregon. So they caught up to the guy and interviewed him in Oregon, and that's why the file said Oregon, and they crossed it out. And I don't know if this is from an interview with a newspaper person, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But also, one thing that was sort of weird looking is on the top of page 8, under the unclassified stamp, it says certificate, but it's all caps and there's dashes between the letters. So C-E-R-. I've never seen that before, and it's a little strange looking, and I'm not sure why it's there. But anyways, the statement is, my name is redacted. I'm 47 years old and have flown since I was 19 years old. Then I'm going to skip some from this first paragraph because he goes on and on about experience and stuff. I have done stunt flying for air shows and various other types of aeronautical exhibitions. Skipping some, brother was Tex Rankin, who was quite well known in both civilian and military flying circles. So, I mean, they redacted his name, but there you go, right there. You could probably figure out who he was if you wanted to. And even if you're lazy and you don't feel like it, actually in the back of the file, there's newspaper clippings I'll talk about that have his name right there, unredacted. So it's like, why did they bother redacting it in his witness statement if they're then just going to put it in the file? And I don't know, it's weird. It doesn't make any sense. But we've talked about that before, how it's very common for the witness names to be redacted in one part of the file, but not another.
Pop up in another part.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah, my next case, though.
Yeah.
It's redacted.
The whole case?
The whole case.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting case. All right, let's get back to my case.
Your case is long.
Yeah, this is a long one, but I thought it was really fun because it sort of substantiates the Kenneth Arnold case.
Oh, this is your long one. I thought you had short ones.
No, this is my long one, and then I have a couple of really short ones.
Oh.
So we'll do this one.
Okay.
All right. So Tex, anyways, to date, I have accomplished 7,000 hours in the air as pilot of both civilian and military aircraft. I am well qualified to say when I see articles flying through the air. So this is a pilot with a significant amount of military and civilian experience, and he did like stunt flying for air shows and stuff. So he's also probably was a very talented pilot. They don't just let anybody do those stunts. You got to be really good, I think. I don't know.
And he sounds like he knows he's not going to be believed. And
Yeah.
he's kind of, trying to show everyone that he's a credible witness.
Right. So that was there's more background that he put in there, but I skipped over some of it because I didn't want it to get too long. Anyways, here's the sighting. At approximately 12 noon on the 14th of June, I was lying in the front yard of my home. There was a lad mowing the lawn at the time. I looked into the sky and saw 10 articles flying from the south to the north at what I would judge to be 8,500 feet. Now he calls them articles instead of airplanes because he doesn't know that they're airplanes. This was before, people really used this term flying saucer or UFO commonly. So he didn't know what to call them. So he calls them articles. Just to kind of clear that up because it's sort of confusing. The objects were flying at approximately what I would judge to be 350 miles per hour. As I have stated before, I have done quite a lot of map work for the U.S. Forest Service. I distinctly remember that at the time I saw the articles, I mentioned it to the lad who was mowing the lawn at the time. I told the lad that the objects were in all probability some sort of Army or Navy test planes from the nearby test centers of the deserts of Southern California. Having quite a knowledge of aircraft in general, I attempted to explain to the lad mowing the lawn that the objects were probably on some sort of training mission for either the Army or Navy. At that time, I did not give the slightest thought to anything but that the objects were some sort of test ship for the government services. The object resembled the pictures that I have seen of the XF-5U-1, the so-called flying flapjack that the Navy is testing. After the object disappeared, I proceeded into the house and had my noon meal. At approximately 2:15, I went back into the yard to sit and lie in the shade. At this time, the objects reappeared, going from north to south, although this time there were only 7 of the articles. When I first saw the original 10 objects, they were flying in a V formation with one object seemingly straggling in the rear of the formation. When the objects appeared the second time, they were still in the V formation, although there was only 7 of the objects at this time. I remember at this time that I told the lad, who was still working on the lawn, that poor lad.
I hope he's getting paid.
He's out there for hours. His parents are like, it's not good enough. You missed a couple of blades. Get back out there,
Bakersfield, too. There's lawns in Bakersfield.
Yeah, I know, right? And this is probably pretty hot out at this time of year. But anyways, still working on the lawn, that probably 3 of the objects had proceeded back to their base on a different course. I actually thought that this was the case, that the other 3 objects had probably gone back to their base on the other side of the mountain from Bakersfield. A week or so later, when I read of Mr. Kenneth Arnold claiming that he had seen articles flying through the air over the Cascade Mountains in Washington, I realized that the articles that I saw were probably the same thing. I was still reluctant to mention this to anyone, thinking that they would probably say that I was crazy. After some time, I mentioned the incident to the editor of the Oregonian, a Portland, Oregon newspaper. At this time, I was in Portland for the remainder of the summer. The results of the conversation with the editor of the paper is put forth in the accompanying newspaper article. I fully realize that this is a broad statement in view of the fact that there has been so much publicity put forth in various newspapers of the country. I am of sound mind in every respect, and I am firmly convinced that the articles I saw are actually some sort of flying machines, although I cannot say from where they came or to where they were going. I say what I have said with no idea of publicity or personal gain. So I have a few thoughts on this statement. There was only one report, right? But did they follow up to ask other people in the area, like the lad, what he had seen? Because I don't think they did. They didn't say anywhere in the file that they had tried to find other witnesses in the area. They just said that nobody reported to us specifically, therefore it didn't happen. Paraphrasing there a little bit, but anyways, that's what they suggested. So it doesn't appear that they did follow up. And I think that's kind of sad because there's probably a ton of other witnesses in the area who also probably just thought it was, government airplanes, even though I don't think we had anything at the time that could have fit that description. The altitude and speed of the objects could be vastly different than what was perceived because, as anybody knows, it's incredibly difficult to judge these things, even for an experienced pilot. You have no frame of reference whatsoever. The weather was clear, so they were just up there in the blue sky. They could have been very, very large and far away. They could have been like a mile across each and almost in the atmosphere, or they could have been very, very tiny and very, very close, But given how things move in the sky, you can get a general idea because the farther away something is, kind of like the hazier it'll look, So in general, I think you can get a ballpark, but that ballpark can also be very, very off. So I don't put too much stock into the numbers he provided. I'd look at it as more of just like a pure ballpark as to what he thinks may have happened. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, there was only one flying flapjack. It definitely could not have been that because not only was there only one flying flapjack, but it was built in the Connecticut area, I think. And we know, looking back through history, we know that this stuff has been released and they've said that it never left that area, right? It was only tested in Connecticut. So it would not have made its way all the way over to California,
Especially not 10 of them.
Yeah. Well, they didn't even have 10 of them. So these would be some pretty strange birds, right? And birds, I'm not sure that birds can fly this fast. And even though his estimate of speed is possibly not accurate, we're talking about something that's going very, very fast. And, 350, the speed of sound, depending on the density of air, is going to be something on the order of 500 or 600 miles an hour. So we're talking about something going half the speed of sound, unless I've completely misremembered those, that number. But we're talking about something that goes very, very fast. I doubt it was a bird.
And the formation of birds and how they move, there's something organic about them, So if he, as a pilot, thinks that these are aircraft for very specific reasons, in his experience, I'm sure he's seen lots of bird formations.
Yeah, and he explicitly says in his statement that it looks like a machine. He's very clear about that these look like machines. They did not look like birds. And birds tend to have like a fluttering movement or a shaking movement as they flap their wings. It would be fairly difficult to mistake birds for airplanes. I suppose it's possible under the right conditions, but I think that would be kind of unusual, probably pretty rare. So he doesn't say that they were like aliens or anything weird like that.
Sounds like he just thought they were military.
He thought they were military. And then, probably out of a sense of duty or who knows what, after he heard Arnold's sighting, he called in or he wrote in or whatever and reported his sighting, which he thinks were probably the same things that Arnold saw. So that's kind of the thoughts I had on his statement, right? And as far as publicity or personal gain goes, he probably had money because he was a pilot. And it suggests here that if he was vacationing in Portland and he had a house in Bakersfield, that he probably was well enough off to where he wouldn't be trying to get a few extra bucks from making up a story, right? He probably wouldn't have needed to do that because he sounded like a fairly successful dude. But you never know. I mean, maybe anything's possible. And as far as like fame or publicity, maybe he just wanted his name in the newspapers. I mean, that is a possibility. We don't know for sure, but I think this is a reliable witness, and I sort of believe what he said. Anyway, so on page 10 of the report, there's a memorandum for the officer in charge, and this memorandum is about looking for somebody in Palm Springs. And they say that they're looking for Mr. Redacted, and they looked at like the police department, the Desert Sun newspaper, the water company, gas company, telephone company, et cetera, on and on and on. They looked for him for, everywhere they could think of to look for him, and they couldn't find him. is what they said at first. There was no record of him. They interviewed the postmaster, hadn't heard of him either. And I'm like saying, wait a minute, Palm Springs? What are we talking about, Palm Springs? This guy was in Bakersfield and then he went to Oregon for vacation. What?
Maybe he has a house in Palm Springs too.
Yeah, it turns out he spends the winters in Palm Springs.
Of course he does. How old is he?
He was 47 at the time of the sighting.
47, and he's just traveling around to his house. Can you imagine having vacation homes like that nowadays?
That's what I'm saying. This guy seems like he had some resources to where he wouldn't have had to fabricate a story to make money for personal gain.
Oh, I'll be
right?
in Palm Springs where the weather is fabulous this time of year.
In the winter it is. It's horrible in the summer. If you've ever been, which we have. So this page in the file goes on to say that they found evidence of Mr. Redacted getting mail. They found a piece of mail for him that they opened up and looked at it, and there was some discussions of various religious things that I don't think is really relevant, and that it turns out they found out that he lived in like a trailer park. So it wasn't a fancy home. It was just sort of like a little vacation place in the winter, probably, that he went to in Palm Springs. It's a little trailer, I guess. So at first I was like, is this a mistake? What does this have to do with anything? Is this from a different file? Because I have seen pages misfiled. I've seen pages from another file stuck in the middle of a file where it shouldn't be. That does happen on occasion when you're perusing these things. So you got to be aware of that. But in this case, it turns out that this is actually pertinent. And it just wasn't obvious until later on when I was reading the newspaper clippings. And in one of the clippings, it says that he liked to vacation in Palm Springs for the winter. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's why. But the thing is like, he owns businesses and stuff. So like, they're having trouble finding him. They're going to the postmaster. Why not go to one of the businesses he owns? I don't know. This whole page is just a little weird. But anyways, let's get to the newspaper clippings. All right, got one here. And the title of the article, Pilot Recalls Seeing Discs. And his name is Dick Rankin.
Well, there you go.
It's right there in the subheading, right? Dick Rankin tells of odd aircraft. And I won't read the entire article because it repeats a lot of what I've already said. But it's interesting because in the article it says, he saw the silver saucers over Bakersfield, California on June 23rd while lying on the lawn sunbathing. He told the Oregonian. Now, I don't know if you were paying attention or not, Agent Ether, but there's a couple of discrepancies here. In his witness statement he sent to the Air Force, he said he was lying in the shade, not sunbathing.
Yeah, but it's, artistic license for them to describe the what he was doing, maybe.
But in his statement, he never said anything about saucers. He said they looked like the flapjacks, and they got the date wrong.
Right. Yes, they did.
They got the date completely wrong.
Well, maybe he did not recall it when he was giving his statement to the newspaper. I mean, did the paper article come sometime after he filed his report?
This article was published on the 3rd of July, it says. So
okay.
It was recent enough.
Recent enough to where he should have.
To where it should have been accurate,
Right.
And I just wanted to point out those inaccuracies because I've seen this many, many times in newspapers. They're not good sources of information. The newspapers are really good as a source to find out, okay, something happened and a witness saw something, but it's more often than not. It's very rare for a newspaper to report something accurately. There are always inconsistencies like this. Always or nearly, I should say nearly always, maybe not always, but they're almost always inaccurate. And sometimes they get some of the details very wrong. Getting the day wrong, going from the 14th to the 23rd, I think that's a really important detail. And I think that's unacceptable to get that so wrong, But on the other hand, newspapers are valuable in some ways, but take everything in a newspaper with a grain of salt, everything. And, and you think nowadays, the fake news or whatever, the media inventing stuff. Nah, it's always been that way. This is nothing new, always been that way. If you look at historical stuff.
All newspapers.
Yeah.
No exceptions.
No exceptions. Yeah. and they tend to exaggerate and whatever. But
Embellish.
I've talked about that before. All right. So also here's another little excerpt from the article. I hesitated to say much about them, Rankin said, until I noticed all the hullabaloo in the papers.
Hullabaloo.
Hullabaloo. I pretty much wanted to read that just to say the word hullabaloo. What a word. I'm going to have to put that into my vernacular there because I just think it's such a silly word. Hullabaloo. What's all this hullabaloo? That's a good one. I like that. All right. Anyways, I puzzled over their strange shape for a while and finally concluded that they were the Navy's new XF5U-1 flying flapjacks, which are thin and round with twin propellers and stubby tail. And then the article goes on to talk about how only one XF5U had been built, so that it couldn't be that. And it says that it never left Connecticut, so it can't be that. And then further on in the article, it says, they were not weaving or bobbing in formation. I couldn't make out the number or location of their propellers and couldn't distinguish any wings or tail. They appeared almost round. They looked like pictures of the Navy's flying flapjack. So here he's saying he did not specify in his original statement whether or not he could see features such as those, but here he says he did not see those features. Again, take it with a grain of salt because it's from a newspaper, but it's an interesting detail if it's true. Rankin, who plans to spend the summer here at 834 Northeast Simpson Street. Those dicks. They just put his address right in the article. If you feel like harassing the crap out of this guy,
go check him out. Write him some fan mail.
Here's his article. And for anybody listening, please do not go to that address in the city, which I didn't say where it is. And don't bother whoever lives there now. I mean, that address is probably still there. So please do not go asking them about flying flapjacks because they will probably be very confused.
But if you do, email us and tell us what happened.
No, don't tell them that. Now you're encouraging people to go cause shenanigans. Yeah. But anyways, if the newspaper put his address in there, then was he really that hard to find? It's right here in this article that he sent this article to the Air Force, and yet in the Air Force files, they have this page about how they went to Palm Springs.
Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego?
Yeah, they went to Palm Springs and they were asking the gas company, the Chamber of Commerce, probably the library, everybody. They're asking all the government entities around town, have you heard of this guy? But they have his address right here. So I found that very strange, very strange that they couldn't find him. But who knows? Maybe there's a reason for that was not in the file. But anyways, is now able to resume a little flying for fun, but not commercially, as he said he now operates a string of auto courts, spending his winters at Palm Springs. I don't know what auto courts are. I have no idea what that is.
It's just a dealership? Used lot?
Maybe, but if he had, that suggests he owned a business of some kind, right? Auto court, maybe that means like auto mechanic or something. I don't know. But again, if he has businesses, he can't be that hard to find, right? I don't know. But anyways, a little further down on the article, it talks about other reports. So other reports came Wednesday from Astoria. Jack Hayes, patient in St. Mary's Hospital there, said he saw 2 of the discs Monday.
What kind of hospital?
Right. Don't worry about that. Monday, flying, and then the word is illegible, at a rapid speed, and that they vanished behind the hills. Sorry for my reading. This font here is really tiny, and I couldn't figure out how to get it to print bigger.
Or maybe you need reading glasses.
No, it's really tiny. It's like a 4-point font. All right. That they vanished behind the hills. And Mrs. Earl Sado? Ooh, that's, you can't do that anymore. Mrs. Agent Anderson. You can't, that's bad. I'm going to get canceled for reading this. All right. So, Mrs. Earl Sade, Fort, something, said that she saw a disc traveling north over Fort Stevens. Okay. So Fort Stevens, Tuesday noon, and that other observers saw the same objects. So that's just part of this particular newspaper. And that goes to show you that there were lots of other witnesses in the area. Well, maybe not in the specific area of Bakersfield, but there were people all over the place that did see this. And I talked about this in the Kenneth Arnold episode a little bit, how it was not an isolated sighting, but there were lots and lots of other people who saw it. And then the next page, the last page of the file, there's another couple of newspaper clippings, and there's even more reports in there. An excerpt is, new reports, meanwhile, came in from 3 Oregon cities, Azteca, Madras, and Portland. Still another such account came from 4 states away at Albuquerque, New Mexico. Max Hood, Chamber of Commerce executive, told of seeing a disc-like bluish object following a zigzag path in the northwest sky only Tuesday night. There have been similar reports the past several days from other points in New Mexico, West Texas, and Oklahoma. So the point is that people are seeing these objects all over the dang place, right? And if one had time to go look at libraries and find microfiche or archives of local newspapers, I bet you could find similar sightings everywhere, like all over the dang place. These things seem to be popping up all over the country, but our military did not have anything that looked like a flying flapjack other than the one flying flapjack, which definitely could not have caused these sightings. That's sort of a strange thing, right? So I guess it was just all birds.
All of them.
That's my conclusion. It was all birds. All right. So that was that one. What else you got for us, Agent Ether?
I was just thinking about how it's such a shame that out there, there's all this knowledge at our fingertips, but we're not going to store it anywhere. Eventually, the newspaper articles and clippings and the microfiche films, they're not going to be available. They aren't, and they're not going to be documented like things are now on the internet. There's so many servers and places to find information. You can just go and you can read about sightings. You read about sightings 10 years ago, but I feel like there's this mountain of evidence that needs to be preserved that's not going to be.
There are actually some of those microfiche archives and newspaper archives, some of those are online, either through library websites or through the publisher themselves. Like the LA Times keeps archives online that you can look at some of them. So some of them are not, though. A lot of them are not online.
I was thinking more like small towns.
Right, like a small library who may not have the resources to maintain a robust website. Yeah.
But might have some interesting things. And not even just UFO sightings, just interesting things, historical things. Yeah,
all kinds of historical things. I'm sure there are people who go and look at that stuff. In fact, I've read, UFO books and stuff where people do go and dig through the stacks or whatever. But yeah, like you're saying, hopefully that stuff gets archived in some way to preserve it,
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next case.
Let's do it.
Okay. I have an air intelligence information report coming from Norwalk, Connecticut. And I stumbled across this report because I was just flipping through Fold 3, and all of a sudden there were these street maps and topography of the region.
Yeah.
Which is I was like, well, I haven't seen this before.
That's the fun thing when you're flipping through the files, and you can just kind of like browse through them, and there's little thumbnails of each like page. They're like PDFs, and it'll have a little strip of thumbnails at the bottom. You just kind of scroll through them, and you'll see, okay, like text. You'll be like, wait, is that a photo? That looks weird. And you look at it and like, yep, that's a UFO photo. Or like you're saying, like a map, or, like a picture of people, or just something weird. And you're like, let's look at this.
That's right. So that's exactly what happened. So this report was prepared by one Newton Hamfelt on, let's see, October 15th, 1952. It's report 24-0-164. And it's about a sighting, and boy, is it a doozy, that took place in January in 1952.
Okay.
There was a Mrs. Redacted who contacted the FBI saying she had found some unconventional aircraft, and she would only divulge this information to the proper authorities.
What does that mean?
It means that she would only talk to somebody who came out and would do a investigation. She wanted an investigation done.
Oh, I see. Okay.
She wasn't going to give up the details over the phone. She wasn't going to write a letter. She wanted somebody to come out and do an investigation.
Okay.
So the investigation starts, and instead of giving the interview first, it goes to character witnesses. Not witnesses of the event, but character witnesses.
Yeah, pretty typical.
Yeah, so they start off with a patrolman, Mr. William Carpenter, who's the clerk of records, and they ask him to search the files for any information pertaining to her, and he doesn't find anything except the city directory, which lists her as a resident. The postal clerk said he'd known Mr. Redacted and Mrs. Redacted for about 10 years, and he regarded them as honest, trustworthy, loyal, and dependable people. So far, so good.
Yeah, and I just like to point out that just how unfortunate it is that you had a lot of these people reporting this stuff. They were doing it out of a patriotic duty. You know, they were doing it as American citizens, and they wanted to help the government, you know, solve these things or get to the bottom of it. Or if they saw something unusual, like let's say if you saw like communists setting up a commie bunker underground, you would report that to the government and say, hey, this is shenanigans and here's what I saw. But often they were, you know, there's a character assassinations against these people who were just doing what they felt was their duty.
So next they interviewed the postman that delivered their mail, one Sherwood Quigley, and he described them as honest, reliable people, but said the girl was considered high hat.
Hi-hat, like from a drum set?
Yeah, that's what it refers to. I had to go online. I guess it's slang. It means kind of a snob or a bit snooty.
Oh, all right. So she's
sort of a hi-hat.
I mean, that's that I guess as far as character attacks go, that's not that bad. That doesn't really discredit her at all. Just, you know.
Right. Kind of strange to have in there. But
Yeah.
He said she was otherwise all right in every way.
Okay, well, you know.
They interviewed the husband. He didn't give up much. And then they went to where she worked, which was a simple assembly factory where she put together electric and mechanical devices. Just had a simple factory job. And they interviewed her manager. He had records, personnel records, rated her just as a generally good employee. However, he stated that he suddenly divulges this personal information. He says he heard she had a brain tumor or some sort of injury to her brain and she needed an operation.
Okay.
Afterwards, it changed her for the better. Now, I don't know if he knew her as a child. I don't know where he's getting this information from. I don't know if she told him that it changed her for the better, but that sounds unlikely.
That sounds like unreliable information. What you may call a rumor or hearsay.
Yeah. He goes on to say that she can fly off the handle under emotional strain and will become loud, belligerent, and strongly opinionated.
Well, but who doesn't become belligerent or opinionated under emotional strain?
Well, and here's the thing, too. This is a specific period in time in the 50s where there were expectations for how women needed to behave themselves. So if she was, let's say, a little opinionated, that might be seen as flying off the handles as someone who's a little assertive, a little emotional. Yeah. You know, they're like, well.
Will you believe it? I told Mrs. Redacted to stop being such a you-know-what, and then I smacked her in the face, and then she got really upset, and she went home. Can you believe that?
I can't believe it. He said when she wasn't stressed, she was a, quote, very pleasant girl, good worker, and intelligent, unquote. Very strange.
Yeah, that's kind of...
I was like, all right. And then the plant medical examiner said he believes she was a hypochondriac, but gave no evidence. It was just, that was the statement.
All right.
All right. So let's take a look at the interview with Mrs. Redacted.
All right, let's do
What
it.
done she's seen.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Okay.
After all this.
All right. So she's a mom. She has a husband. She has a 5-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son, and her mother lives with her. So she was out doing some shopping. At 5:30 p.m., she left her house and drove alone in their family car, which was a 1940 Oldsmobile sedan. She wanted to buy some milk. She was in the store 10 to 15 minutes, and then she drove east along Stevens Avenue. Now, from here on out, there's a lot of specific descriptions of where she drove and cross streets and how far away other things were. And I actually think that's why there were maps in the case file, is because she was so specific about where she was at every point in time in her sightings, because she was driving. And at some point, she would stop the car and get out and then continue to drive and follow these lights that she would see, which I'll talk about.
All right.
So I'm not going to name every street that she turned on and followed and that sort of thing. But just so you're aware, I think that's why there were maps, because she was so descriptive.
But so that's in the report. She says very specifically, report. I did this, I made a left turn here, and that kind of thing. Okay.
Exactly. And the street was this far away. Okay. So she says it was a dark, clear, dry night. She describes it as being lovely and crisp, but there was no moon. It was very dark, and the streets were very lonely. So no one else was around.
Sounds like the beginning of like one of those noir detective books or something.
So she looks ahead and she sees a pair of headlights through her windshield. She's like, well, that's strange. So she glances at her rearview mirror and she doesn't see anything. So the lights are pretty faint at this point, but they're clear enough to be distinguished, and she thinks that's unusual. So she stops her car. She gets out. The trees are pretty bare this time of year, so she can clearly see that there's light on the horizon as far as she can see. And she said it approached her in a straight line from the left of the gas tank. Now here it's not referring to the gas tank in her car. This is actually a big storage tank for the Connecticut Light and Power Gas Company. There was also a hospital that hadn't yet been constructed. I think it was partially constructed. And she said the lights were visible to the right 15 to 20 feet. And again, they looked like headlights. They were moving very fast. And she was, quote, amazed at the rapidity of its motion. So she inched her car down the hill slowly at 3 to 5 miles per hour to maintain the view and was kind of following it along. It came to a gradual stop and it emitted great brilliance. They'd traveled from east to west and were now moving south, and she's following them, flying at a slow speed just north of Stevens, and then went to hang in midair over the Armory building.
Huh.
So she's describing them as moving very fast, and then she's describing them as moving very slow. So I'm assuming it changed its momentum.
Did she mention it making any noise at any point?
No, throughout the report, there's no mention of noise. It was quiet.
Yeah, so it was silent. That's really interesting. So, I mean, it wasn't a helicopter or anything.
Oh, no, just wait till she describes it in detail. It was definitely not a helicopter.
Okay.
She said it was big, terribly big, and she could see the top of it as it traveled across her path. And as far as the altitude goes, she says it must have been pretty low because she can see it being reflected off the lights from the nearby business district. She thought maybe it was 4 telegraph poles up. And I quote, "It's the most beautiful piece of mechanism I've ever seen. It's out of this world. I would not call it a flying saucer. I would call it a ship. It was dome-shaped, perfectly stainless steel with the height of 2 family houses."
Really?
That's what she said. It was an 8 to 9 minute sighting, 5 to 6 minutes of which she spent standing and watching the road from the same spot. So I'm going to go on to give her description, and then I'm going to describe what I think she was seeing, because it kind of gets interesting here. So she says she was standing and there was this beautiful band of white light about 10 feet high, extending from one end of the ship to the other in a horizontal and circumferential direction. It was 10 feet above the base of the ship, and there was another 20 feet of metal on top of it. The band was transparent, and through the band, she could see machinery. She says a vast amount of machinery within the ship reaching up to the dome. She said 6 men could walk shoulder to shoulder around the ship between the machinery in the center and the glass encasement on the outer edge. The machinery was the same metallic substance as the fuselage, which was a dull finished stainless steel. There was nobody moving, there was no sound, and she felt boundlessly fearless during this encounter.
Weird.
It goes on.
Okay.
There was one red taillight, a fourth of the size of the headlight, located a few feet below the top of the band of light that was inside the ship, but the headlights were in the middle of the band and flush with the outer shell. Nothing was blinking, and she calls it a work of art. The bottom of it was flat, and there were intricate patterns of lines and shapes, angular and dissimilar to one another, made of the same dull stainless steel. She saw no bolts, joints, landing gear, or doors. It traveled away at the same altitude along Connecticut Avenue towards the Long Island Sound, where it would go over the hill and disappear.
Okay.
So she went home and she told her mom. A few days later, she told her husband, and then later she would go on to tell her supervisors. But it wasn't very well received, so she wasn't providing any details at this point. She kind of just dropped it.
Yeah, because as we know, you don't want to go around saying this stuff, you know?
So the way I picture it with her description, she actually drew, or whoever took the report drew, an object, because the way she describes it, I think it's kind of hard to picture.
Yeah.
So if you picture a dome with a flat bottom, in the back there's a red tail light. It's pretty small. In the front there's 2 headlights, almost like a car.
Okay.
And then there's, in between the headlight and that tail light, there's that band of white light behind which is the machinery. But it doesn't sound like it's inside the ship. It sounds like it's behind or contained within the band of white light.
Right.
And then underneath of it, you have all those intricate patterns and lines that she's talking about. And it must have been pretty close if she could look up and make out those details.
That's pretty wild.
It is pretty wild.
What a hi-hat.
Well, and then she would see it again. January 29th at 3 p.m., she was sitting, they called it a rest room, but there were other people there. It sounds like a lounging room.
Okay.
And the place was redacted, but she said it was on the 2nd floor. It had an eastern exposure, and she looked outside and there was something flying by in an arc, and she knew right away what it was, but it went by so fast she didn't dare mention it to the other people in the room. She said it was the size of a nickel coin and flying at the altitude of a conventional aircraft.
So very, very far away.
Yeah, and maybe she thought she saw it. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that she would know for sure it's the same object at such a distance.
Right. This one, it might be that she saw a regular airplane at a great distance, and because of the atmospheric conditions, or maybe it was flying in and out of clouds or whatever, maybe she thought she saw it, but she did not really see it.
And at that point, she's so freaked out that she's just like, it has to be the same thing.
Right, because this has to be a life-changing event, seeing something like this so close.
Well, they interviewed the mother after this, and she said that 3 days later, she was looking out the kitchen window and she saw a streak due west, about a foot long, sharply defined light going really fast. It was so fast she didn't have time to draw the curtain to show her daughter. It was like a big cigar, only thicker, she said, like a large neon tube traveling across the sky from the north to the south above the horizon at a great distance. She said it was definitely not a shooting star.
Huh. Well, and there are a great deal of cigar-shaped UFO reports out there.
Yeah, but her daughter's description was very unusual. I've never heard of any UFO like this before.
It does remind me of certain descriptions that I've seen in the past. For example, with the Illinois 2000 triangles, some of the witnesses described that the UFOs had a texture they described as sort of like the Star Destroyers from Star Wars or something, right? Like they had structures and things coming off of them. She describes it as machines. Other people have described it in other ways, but I have seen descriptions that remind me of that for sure.
All right. Well, I just like to point out too, she waited a while to report this. She saw it in January and she didn't report it until October, and she was asked by the field agent why she had waited so long. And basically she said what a lot of people say. She didn't want to be ridiculed at the time, and then the more she thought about it, the more she thought she should go ahead and report it.
Well, and I would also like to point out that in 1952, we have one of the most significant UFO events ever to happen in the United States, which was from July 12th to July 29. We had the 1952 Washington, D.C. flap, which, it's the closest thing we've ever had to a UFO landing on the White House lawn. I mean, like literally they were all over the Capitol. The military didn't know what the heck they were. We did an episode on it, so I won't go into detail, but it could be that after that event hit the newspapers, it started to, I mean, I know October is quite a ways after July, but it's not that long after July. So maybe, stuff was hitting the newspapers all the time. And she thought, well, maybe I'll finally report this. Maybe it'll be safe to report.
Yes, that's a good point. Although there's always that brain tumor. You never know.
Yeah, you never know.
That hypochondriac.
Yeah. Well, she is a hypochondriac, brain tumor ridden hi-hat.
So there you go.
Those dang hi-hats, they like to talk about UFOs. I mean, I don't know. And that's the thing. Like Hynek has complained in his files. If you read about, what he writes, he'll complain that he doesn't have enough personnel to investigate stuff. He's an astronomer, and yet he spends a lot of time. I don't know if Hynek was the one investigating this particular case, but it seems strange to me that they would waste so much time and resources going after character witnesses, basically, instead of investigating the actual sighting,
This is a pretty thorough statement, though.
Yeah.
That she gave. And very detailed. I don't know. It reminds me of, do you remember the Blue Book episode we did where I talked about the Christmas tree?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course.
This is just a really unique sighting. I liked it.
Yeah, that is a really cool one, actually. And there's a lot of stuff like that. There's so many sightings in the files like that, which is why I encourage everybody, if you ever have some downtime, just go peruse the files. You'll be surprised at what you find. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. All right. So is that the end of that particular file?
That's all she had to say.
That was a good one, man. That was really good. All right. So I'll get to my next one, which is of an event that happened on June 29th, 1947. I wanted to look at the really early stuff.
Those are fun.
Yeah.
Early things are fun.
Because we barely had jets at this point. Like our technology was very primitive. So if something, weird happened, it probably wasn't us, but you never know. Anyways, June 29, 1947, incident number 43 from Clarion, Iowa. It was a civilian witness. At 16:45 CST, and that would be 4:45 in the afternoon, the shape was an inverted saucer, and the size was 175 to 250 feet in diameter, and it was 12 feet thick. The course was south-southeast to northwest-east, and the number of The number in the group was 5 in the first group and 13 in the second. It made a sound like an electric motor or a dynamo. The color of the objects was dirty white, and their speed was 300 miles an hour. Their approximate altitude was 1,200 miles an hour, and the observation was a ground observation, and the things were traveling in a single file formation, so in a line.
Weird. So you have a bunch of off-white saucers that are flipped around, traveling in a straight
line.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the first page. That's like the summary page. On page 2, it says incident number 21. I think it said incident number 43, but it's weird because in this file, there appear to be 2 separate files for the same incident. So it's number 43 and number 21. And I couldn't figure out, it doesn't say anywhere in the files why there were 2 separate entries for this one. It's kind of weird. Maybe it was a clerical error. I don't know. But again, on the 29th of June, 1947, 1645, Des Moines, Iowa, the observer, a bus driver, reported observing 13 objects at 1,200 feet altitude, traveling in a straight line in file at 300 miles an hour. The objects were elliptical in form, inverted saucers, 12 feet thick, 175 to 250 feet in diameter, dirty white, and made a sound like an electric motor or dynamo. There was no further information supplied except that the observer stated they looked like dots in the sky. But, I mean, 250 feet is pretty dang big, right? A 250-foot object at 1,200 feet is not going to be a dot in the sky. It's going to be pretty big. So I think what that suggests is that the observer is not that good at estimating these things. So I think we can take these numbers that were given and more or less disregard the specific numbers and don't worry about the altitude or the size of the objects.
Just stick with upside down off-white saucers.
Rather, they saw something and they perceived it as being fairly large and fairly low. Because 1,200 feet, like if you saw a jumbo jet flying at 1,200 feet above you, you'd probably crap your pants. That's like pretty low.
Yeah.
That's pretty low for something to be flying. You'd be able to make out details and things on it. It's not like when it's flying up at altitude at like 30,000 feet or something where you just see like a little dot. So they may be mistaken about some of those numbers, and that's just their best estimation. So AMC opinion, Air Material Command, AMC opinion, these objects were seen just outside Des Moines and were flying toward Des Moines. If they were not ordinary objects mistaken for something else by the observer, but were really unusual aircraft, it seems almost certain that someone else would have also reported them. There is insufficient information for a proper analysis. And again, we have this strange idea that, well, nobody else reported it, so it didn't happen, which is like, no, dude, stuff goes unreported all the time.
Well, and how many people walk around just looking up at the sky?
Right. Yeah, it's so weird. And there's a lot of different psychological things that can happen. Like people can see it and then they can just sort of shrug and go about their day. And it just sort of, it's like fitting the square peg into the round hole. It just doesn't fit into their brain as something that should be there. So they just sort of, it just sort of slips from their memory, or maybe they're afraid to report it or whatever. I mean, there's any number of reasons why somebody wouldn't report things. And like, I saw a weird thing myself that I've talked about on this show that I didn't report because it's like, well, what are they going to do? Report it. That was the one that looked like a satellite, but it stopped mid path. I talked about that on a previous episode, I'm pretty sure. But, yeah, so I just, that really just kind of irks me that it just seems lazy, it just seems pretty lazy for them to say, well, nobody else reported it to us, so it didn't happen. Anyways, on page 3, this is a summary, again, probably written by Alan Hynek. He says, there is no obvious astronomical explanation for this incident. If the estimate of size can be given any credence at all, the objects could not have been farther than 5 miles away. This is an absolute upper limit, and objects probably were very much closer. Now, take that with a grain of salt, because this guy was an astronomer, and he didn't know about like visual acuity and, the sensitivity of the human eye and all that stuff. And it's, I don't want to go into a whole discussion. I talked about this during the Kenneth Arnold case that I did a while back on this show. But basically, our eyes are a lot more sensitive and can see things a lot farther away under good conditions than you might expect, particularly for people who have good eyesight. Anyways, page 4. This is page 4 and 5 are summaries. Page 4 says this incident refers to the same sighting by the same observer as that summarized in incident 21. See that report for conclusions. So page 5 and 6 are from 2 different files, it appears, and these are just summaries of data. And it's they call it a checklist unidentified flying objects, and it just lists certain data like the date, the time, the location, the name, the occupation. One of them says agent of Amazing Stories magazine. The other one says bus driver. I'm not sure why there's that discrepancy there, because everything else is pretty much the same, including the address, which is Box 12, Crocker, MO. And I'm pretty sure MO is Montana, isn't it?
I think so.
So everything else is the same. The number of objects, 5 and then 13, 1,200 feet, 300 miles an hour, direction of flight, north-northwest, single file line, sound like an electric motor or dynamo, all the good stuff we've already talked about. And there's 2 separate pages that summarize this, and I just find that very strange. Who knows? Maybe they reported it twice. Maybe they sent in a report. They didn't get a response from the Air Force, so they sent it in again to make sure that the Air Force received it. So that's why there's 2 case files. I don't know. I really don't know, but I'm guessing that the explanation as to why there are 2 separate files is maybe not anything suspicious. It's probably a simple error of some kind. But it is interesting that the occupation is different for the reports when it's very clearly the exact same report. Okay, so on page 7, it says, about 7 miles out of Clarion, Iowa, observer saw an object shoot across the sky in front of the bus he was driving. It was followed by 4 more. The height appeared about 1,200 feet. Observers stepped out of the bus, which was facing east, and noticed some dots in the sky approaching from the opposite direction. They were flying about the same altitude at a speed of about 300 miles an hour. These 13 objects flew in a single file. Roughly, the objects were between a circle and an oval in shape. In appearance, they looked like an inverted saucer flying through the air. The thickest part seemed to be about 12 feet. The diameter could have been anywhere from 175 to 250 feet. They were dirty white in color. The second group disappeared into the north-northwest sky in a matter of a few minutes. They made a noise as they passed overhead similar to an electric motor or dynamo. And that's sort of, I guess it could be an airplane noise. These could be airplanes, They very well could be, but they don't sound like airplanes.
And it does sound like the occupation is bus driver. It's describing getting off a bus and looking.
Right.
And so that implies he was driving.
Yeah. But it makes you wonder why that one page says that it was like somebody from an agent from the magazine, from Amazing Stories magazine or whatever. I don't know. It's weird.
Maybe the information came from the magazine.
That could be. Maybe that's where they got this from. Who knows? Maybe one report is from the magazine and then another report is from the person themselves sending it in, right? That's a good idea. I didn't think of that. I think Agent Ether has solved the mystery. All right. So page 8, we have a page from what looks like the Grudge report, like I talked about in the previous case, and with case 21 circled. And it's listed under 3, non-astronomical with no explanation evident. Subcategory B, evidence offered suggests no explanation, suggesting that the case is unsolved. So the next page in the files is that. So that was the whole thing. The next page is like a separate entry, but it's incident 21 with the same information summarized. And at the bottom is written in hand, not typed. It's the explanation is written other unreliable report, but they don't give any explanation as to why the report is unreliable.
Because it's a bus driver. How dare they?
I guess. The only thing that seems unreliable is probably the explanation of the speed and size and altitude or whatever, that's probably not accurate. But it's a bus driver. You know, how is he supposed to know how fast something is in the sky? He doesn't have a radar, so how does he know how high up it is? You know, he has no way to know that. He's just giving his best guess. So the next page in the file is another page, another like a single page file, and it's like a cover page. And this time there's a summary that says, observers sighted several large saucers heading northwest. They were of a dirty white color. Later, he saw more heading west. And again, it says that it was an unreliable report, but there's no explanation as to how they came to this conclusion. It just says it's unreliable. And it's kind of unfortunate because this could be a very compelling report and it appears to be unidentified, yet they claim that there's a solution, the solution being that the witness is unreliable, which they would later sometimes refer to as crackpot or abbreviated CP in the official files. I wasn't there. I didn't interview the fella, but who knows? I still think it's an interesting case, an interesting report, even if there's not a whole lot to it. All right. Did you have any more short ones, Agent Ether?
I'm good to go until our next Blue Book episode. I love these episodes.
Yeah. All right. Then I have one more. This one's really, really short. It's just a really short 3-page report from June 22, 1947, from Greenfield, Massachusetts. It was a civilian witness. One object. They observed it for 8 to 10 seconds. It was a ground visual observation, and the course was 350 degrees. I don't know what that means, just 350 degrees. The conclusion was A/C for aircraft, and the brief summary, this is page 1, the brief summary is, object was round and irregular and a polished aluminum. Okay, irregular, that's a strange description. So page 2 says, incident 46, this incident does not admit of a ready astronomical explanation. The absence of a trail does not favor the meteoric hypothesis, although the speed and brilliance of the object might. And page 3 is Dr. Hynek's evaluations extracted from Project Grudge report, and it's under 1 astronomical, B, subheading B, fair or low probability, and the 46 for this, this one is number 46 is circled, and that's it. There's just 3 pages in the file. And I feel like there has to be pages missing here, right? So we have an object that's described as round and irregular and a polished aluminum. And yet Hynek says that it's probably not a meteor because it doesn't have a trail, but it was moving fast enough. And the brilliance of the object and the speed suggest it could be a meteor. Like, well, meteors move really, really fast, like 250,000 miles an hour. Like they are super, super fast.
Don't want to be hit with one.
Yeah. If a meteor was to streak from horizon to horizon, which they generally don't because they burn up or whatever, I've never seen it happen. I'm not sure if it's possible, but imagine a streaking meteor. It would go from horizon to horizon, like in just a second or two. Like it would just be boom, boom, and it would be there. So we're talking about an object that appears to be irregular, round and irregular, and a polished aluminum moving incredibly quickly. And that's it. That's all we have for this file. And like, there's no witness statement. There's no other information. And it's like really tantalizing because I feel like this is a really interesting case and it's missing. And that's all we have on it. And that's why I kind of wanted to talk about it because it's just a really fun and interesting mystery. And that's it. That's the whole file. Just those 3 pages.
Little tidbit.
Yeah, a little tidbit. Maybe
little tease.
Maybe somebody out there knows about this case and it's, there's information elsewhere available, maybe from a newspaper or a book or something. Who knows? Maybe there's more out there to this case, but that's all I found in the Blue Book files. All right. Well, I think, is that all we have this week?
That's all we have. Keep it strange.
Keep it strange.